and thanks to everybody for joining us on this webinar today. So my name is Patrick Devine-Wright, and I'm the PI Director of the Access Programme, and I'm a Professor of Geography based at the University of Exeter. We do plan to record this webinar so that we can make the recording available to potential applicants on our website. So we just would like to ask you for your consent to do that at this stage before we get going. And as you can see from the slide there, there'll be an opportunity today for everybody to ask questions and for us to answer those as best we can. I'm going to present some of the core details of our Flex Fund and the round two in particular. And we're also going to hear from two of the award winners from our round one. So two early career researchers who'll be talking about the funding they received last year. Anyway, without further ado, we'll get going. So next slide, please. Okay, so just to briefly tell you a bit about the broader project that this funding opportunity falls within. ACCESS stands for Advancing Capacity for Climate and Environment Social Science. It's a 5-year program, and it is funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. And the primary aim of ACCESS is to provide leadership on the contributions of the social sciences to tackle and solve a range of different environmental challenges. And it's based upon the fundamental proposition that we're not going to solve environmental problems without taking the people or the human dimension into account, that people are central to understanding and to solving these environmental challenges. So what ACCESS aims to do is to tackle this issue by enhancing the visibility, the use, and the impact of social science in interdisciplinary contexts in order to solve environmental challenges. And because that's the primary overall goal of ACCESS, the Flex Fund has to stick to that too. So all applications and all funded projects under our flexible fund must contribute to those overall access objectives of making social science knowledge and insight and data more visible, more used, and more impactful across society at large. Next slide, please. So one of the key things we would like to avoid is applications that come in that largely might be reproducing activities that we're already doing. So as with last year in the round one, we'd really like any potential applicants and applicant teams to take a close look at what we are doing under our current work program, because we really want, as I said, to avoid duplication. And as you can see here, we have 4 primary packages of work. In the first one, which is led by colleagues at the University of Surrey, what they're aiming to do is to map and review the kinds of social science that have been applied to date on a range of environmental challenges, with a particular focus on research and research into policy and teaching to some degree as well. The second work package is more about training and empowerment capacity building. And there's a range of different kinds of mechanisms that we are using in order to enable early career researchers and others to be able to use and to share social science in impactful ways. And these include masterclasses, placements, summer schools, a leadership college, and mentoring. Thirdly, we aspire to innovate this area, this ecosystem of interdisciplinary environmental social science. And the Flexible Fund, which we're here to talk about today, is in this work package. Other aspects include the kind of rapid, agile response work we do, including our task forces. And we've got a current one on the go around net zero. Secondly, we do some scoping work for funding institutions like the ESRC to consider what might be useful topics for future calls in the coming years. And finally, we have a citizens panel mechanism that we connect up to our rapid response task forces to gauge the opinion of citizens about core topics, as I said, like net zero. Finally, we do a lot of work around knowledge exchange. So that's to do with our weekly newsletters, our online web platform, and a range of different kind of mechanisms to make social science visible, like an expertise database, a data exchange tool, and a kind of a media environment tracking platform. So those are things we're doing already, and all of those are influenced by the Access Guiding Principles. So the Access Guiding Principles are really fundamental things about our program that also the Flexible Fund must adhere to as well. And basically what it involves is taking an integrated approach to three key guiding principles, and those are equality, diversity, and inclusion, knowledge co-production, and environmental sustainability. So everything that we do, all aspects of this work program, all of our events, any training, anything has to be guided by an integrated approach to these three fundamental principles. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the Flex Fund is what we're here to talk about today, and it is 20% of our grant from ESRC, so a total of approximately £1 million. And we distributed a first round last year, and we'll hear a bit more about that later on. What we want to do in this second round is to fund larger, more substantial grants. And these will vary from between 200 and 240K in total value. Yeah, it says round 3 there, but it should be round 2. We're only doing 2 rounds. But anyway, it's important that all applicants have an early career researcher on their applicant team. They don't have to be the PI like last time around, but they can be, and they do have to be on the team. Ideally, the project has been co-produced with non-academic partner organizations and or crosses disciplinary boundaries. So this idea of boundary crossing is very important to the kind of projects that we're interested to resource in round 2. We're also keen to have a good distribution of geography. A lot of the submissions last time around came from England, and particularly the southwest and southeast of England. We'd like to see more proposals coming in from Northern Ireland, from Wales, from Scotland, etc., because we do want to have a diverse portfolio of projects coming out of our Flexible Fund. And as mentioned, these Flexible Fund projects have to keep with the broader aim of our Access Network, which is to develop new ways of thinking, new approaches or new networks that advance the impact and the use and the visibility of social science to address the transition to a sustainable and biodiverse environment and net zero society. So it's not principally about producing new scientific understandings or producing new novel research in and of itself. Next slide, please. Well, there we go. That's what I just said. So it's not primarily about supporting new research. And I think that's absolutely key. What that means is that if you've got a research proposal up your sleeve and you're thinking, oh, where might it send it to? And if you were thinking of sending it to ESRC, responsive mode or whatever, this is probably not where you should be sending it, because this is not for conventional grant applications that try and create new knowledge in and of itself. So what we might be looking at, and these are just illustrative, of course, would be something like pilot projects to experiment with new ideas, methods, or challenges, to develop new resources which communicate insights and data to different target audiences. It could be about convening events that bring different kinds of stakeholders and audiences together in order to get that message across about what environmental social science can do or can tackle. It could be about capacity development to enable boundary crossing collaborations, the interdisciplinary environmental social science that we've already talked about. And it could be research involving primary or secondary data analysis. For example, gauging the contributions of particular disciplines or different perspectives in informing policy or decision-making on a given topic. And I guess if you're curious about what our projects look like, take a look at the round 1 projects. And that's why they're available on our website for you to see in more detail. And that's why we've got some of the leaders of round 1 Flex Fund projects here today to talk about their own work in their own words. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, enabling and empowering early career researchers is very important to Access as a whole. And we're driving that through every part of the Flex Fund. In round 1, all the PIs had to be early career researchers. In round 2, they can be PIs, but they must be either a co-I or a PI. So every applicant team must have an early career researcher built into that. At least one, more than one. You can have as many as you want, but we're saying that there must be at least one. the criteria for determining who's an early career researcher is actually not that rigid or clear. It kind of depends. It's taken in different ways, but we're using these criteria here, and they're exactly the same ones that we used last year in terms of whether you're on a relatively short-term contract rather than a permanent contract, and also to do with your research grant history. We're not particularly interested in people who've already secured millions of pounds worth of funding. So we're using these definitions for now, having discussed it with our ESRC colleagues. We're also aware that it's not that clear what an early career researcher looks like if you're not working in a university or a research institution. So we've also put guidance on what that looks like in a public sector body in our FAQ document, frequently asked questions. And I would signpost everybody to that document if you're unsure or you'd like more guidance on all of this. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we're interested in boundary crossings and co-production. And one of the main ways that you can signal that in your application is to be really clear about who the non-research or non-academic partner organizations are that you're intending to work with. We want to see that clearly on all applications. So we welcome proposals involving genuine collaboration between academic and non-academic partners. We encourage applications that include diverse sectors, different kinds of expertise, different scales of activity. But proposals must be led by a research-oriented institution that's eligible to receive UKRI, ESRC funding, and you can find out about those specific eligibility rules by looking at the links in the documents for the call, the frequently answered questions, etc. These aren't eligibility rules that we've created. We are bound to ESRC rules ourselves, and we're simply signposting you to those eligibility rules, and we hope that you'll be very clear on them. It's not that flexible fund applications cannot have an international dimension, but that said, the primary focus of activity in these grants should be within the UK, and it should be clearly signposted as such. The other thing I'd say, and we'll come back to this, is that we don't want applications that just look like they're doing co-production or look like they're involving genuine collaboration. We really want to see you driving that through in all aspects of the application. So, for example, one of the documents we'll look at in quite close detail is the justification of the budgetary resources that you need, that you want to spend. And we want to see evidence in those resource documents about how you're making co-production happen, how you're bringing partnerships together in the organization, how you're distributing the resources that you might receive. Next slide, please. Right. I think Sue is somewhere on this call, but because I'm not totally sure, I'm going to speak for Sue. So Sue Williams is one of our nature agency colleagues, and Access is quite unusual in being a kind of a project funded by ESRC that isn't just about academics or by academics. So we have lots of nature agency colleagues who are part of our leadership team. And those agencies include the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales, etc. And Sue works in Natural Resources Wales. And these were some tips that she shared with us last time around, Flex Fund Round 1, and they're still useful today. So make it clear the evidence research needs of your stakeholders. You know, who needs to know what knowledge you're producing? What do they want in terms of questions to be asked and answers to be provided? Consider how actionable your proposal might be by those people that you're working with. How can they do something useful with it in the world to tackle these environmental challenges that we're facing? Think very carefully about what your research will produce in terms of outputs. Are they fit for purpose? Will they be usable and accessible and easily taken up by stakeholder partners or key audiences for your work? So be very careful about that. We know academics are very, very good at producing academic journal papers, but that's largely because we're writing for people like ourselves. If we're interested in partnership across boundaries, we have to rethink solely producing academic outputs of that kind and writings of that kind. And obviously, those kinds of boundary crossings are wonderful opportunities for early career researchers to learn how to do co-production, work in partnership and collaboration at an early stage of their careers, which is really useful, which is, again, one of the reasons why we are saying that we must see early career researchers in applicant teams. Next slide, please. So the evaluation criteria are something that every person in an applicant team should be really clear about all the way through the process. If you're not sure what our criteria are, there's a risk that you won't write your application with these in mind, and you might have others in mind which are not what we're using, and therefore you might not be successful. So be really clear about these when you're thinking up your idea and when you're writing through the details of your proposal. And these are slightly different from the evaluation criteria we used in round one. So bear that in mind. Basically, the six here are advancing the use of social science to address climate and environment challenges. I mentioned that as the overall access goal, so it's also the Flex Fund goal. So advancing the use of social science. We also have made the integrated implementation of the guiding principles a key criterion in its own right. And the key word there is integrated implementation. We don't want you to be doing them in silos. We want you to be doing them in concert in an integrated manner. Impact is crucial for these access projects. And what we mean by that is that we would like you to be really clear what the outputs of the research are going to be and how you think those outputs are going to lead to outcomes or impacts. So that trajectory of change, that trajectory of impact from output to impact must be very, very clear in the documents. We want to be absolutely sure what you're trying to achieve and how you're going to do that with outputs. We will score the approach and methodology that you are planning to utilize. We'll consider value for money, of course. And then we have this overall kind of criterion, which is kind of the fit to the call and to the fit with access. And as I mentioned, this is different from conventional research calls because this is more about advancing the visibility, use, and impact of social science knowledge rather than creating new knowledge per se. Next slide, please. So there are several outcomes that we would expect of each funding award. And all projects will be expected to deliver at least two of the following outcomes. So it might be new ideas or conceptual frameworks. It could be new methodologies of translating evidence or insights. It could be new networks, new social networks connecting across boundaries of profession or institution or geography. It could be the development of new kinds of skills or capacities. And it could be about the increased use of social science by specific target groups out there. And in our judgment about what projects to fund, we're going to look for a balanced portfolio across these different outcomes. We don't just want to fund 3 projects that will deliver new ideas or 3 projects that will deliver new skills or capacities. We'll try and have a portfolio approach so that we're going to be producing all of these across the grants that we will fund this time around. Next slide, please. Right, so these are just a few tips, really. Nothing earth-shattering, really, rocket science about these, I have to say. But I guess the top one just says, use all the time available. There is no advantage to submitting a proposal next week or the week after. It won't get any extra points because you've done it quickly or you've submitted it early. So take the time available. We have deliberately provided several months for you in order to submit your applications because we know that it takes time to do co-production with partner organizations properly. It takes time to produce a quality co-produced bid. So take that time. The deadline is at the end of April. So you have basically almost 3 months to do these. And good luck with that time period. Carefully consider the makeup of your team. I've already mentioned about valuing early career researcher input, also valuing partners being inputted on career teams. So think carefully about who's best placed to be on those teams. Start those conversations as early as possible, ideally already. And also with university finance, because yeah, universities don't work that quickly sometimes. So let people know as early as you can that there's a bid likely to go in at the end of April, and start thinking through the finance side of that and the permissions side of that as early as possible. Be concise. The application form is short, so get straight to the point. Make it easy for the reviewers. So think about the marking evaluation criteria all the time and try and make sure that your text matches those criteria, so it's really clear what you're trying to do and what you're trying to produce. And then finally, I think it's be realistic and be resilient. We funded 9 projects in round 1 and we had 61 submissions. So we had obviously a large number of people who were disappointed, who submitted applications but were not funded. We may get more than 60 this time around, but we're only seeking to fund 3 projects. So if you submit something, make sure it's as good as possible. We're not looking for, well, we're not doing any demand management in round 2. We're not restricting the number of applications from different universities or research organizations, but we would ask everyone on this webinar and anybody listening to really think carefully about how many submissions are going into this fund from any one research institution or from any one department or university. It's very unlikely we're going to put we're going to fund 3 projects that are all coming from the same university, for example, because of our interest in funding a diversity of projects in our portfolio program across the Flexible Fund. So think very carefully about submissions, and we would urge caution in having lots of different submissions going in from the same group or institution. And be aware that the odds are not great if you think about Flex Fund round 1. And that doesn't mean that your ideas are not good, but they might be that they're not funded around this, and there might be another opportunity coming up that they can be recycled into. And as our documents make clear, we will try and provide some feedback, generalized feedback, to everybody who might be unsuccessful in round 2, so that you've got at least some knowledge to go with in order to use that kind of time and effort that you've invested in subsequent opportunities. So we hope that that will be useful. Next slide, please. Great. I think I was starting to get tired of my own voice there, and you probably are too. So I'm going to hand over now, where we've got a couple of minutes each from 2 of our award winners in round 1. And the first one is being led by Catherine Price, who's a social scientist at the University of Nottingham. So over to you, Catherine.
Hello there, everybody. So I lead the project Including the More Than Human World in Responsible Research and Innovation, developing a conceptual framework. So the aim of the project is to design, co-produce and provide a conceptual framework for including the more than human world, so animals, plants, soil, water, land, etc., within responsible research and innovation, so within RRI. And the implementation of RRI by researchers ensures that research and its impacts opened up to broader deliberation and engagement and debate in an inclusive manner, something that the Access projects are trying to get to. RRI enables the complexity and uncertainties of research to be revealed through involvement with those impacted by the research as well. And RRI is coming more to the fore, with UKRI and the research councils advocating for its use in some of its funding packages. However, RRI is currently very anthropocentric, and this is something that we're trying to address with this project. And it's quite a novel project, and it's brought together myself as an environmental social scientist with a natural scientist. So my co-investigator is Tom Bott, who's a soil scientist, also from the University of Nottingham. And whilst we're leading the development of this conceptual framework, it's also very much a co-designed and co-produced project as well. And we including a lot of people from outside the academy. We have got a few academics that we are included from different disciplines, but mainly outside the academy. And this enables our project to bridge the divide within academia, along with bringing in and engaging voices and agencies of alternative expertise. And this helps RRI from being based on scientific understandings alone, and it's bringing social science to the fore and ensuring an inclusive and collaborative knowledge base underpinning our framework. And what I just wanted to briefly mention, just to help people, is the Access Guiding Principles and how we've actually implemented those and how we are implementing them in our phases of work. And all 3 phases that we've got are underpinned by the principles in one frame or another. So the initial review of the literature looked at RRI frameworks, literature around care and multi-species studies literature. And what was really important for us here was to include the work of Indigenous scholars and those from the Global South, something that's not really included in RRI frameworks. And that was crucial for us to ensure that EDI was embedded into the project because it feeds through into the other phases of work. Then our knowledge holders workshop, this is a 1-day in-person workshop with a diversity of knowledge holders from both academic and non-academic communities. And this diversity ensures that we've got different knowledges and perspectives feeding into our project. And it's hoped that the knowledge exchange here will ensure that we have a greater reach and impact for the project. Practically, what we've considered here with the actual undertaking of the workshop is the benefits and disadvantages of holding it in person. We've actually considered the venue and how accessible that is for people, ensuring it's not intimidating for those outside the academy for coming into it. We've also considered how people are going to travel there, encouraging the use of public transport where possible. We've also considering catering and use of plant-based menus on the day. So whilst I haven't got time to unpack all that, we are ensuring that there's knowledge co-production in there, EDI and environmental sustainability. And then finally, in the analysis and dissemination phase, whilst there will be at least one academic paper, the most important output for us is the accessible briefing note, and that will be co-designed and co-produced with our knowledge holders from the workshop. That's ensuring that the language is accessible and inclusive. Primarily, it will hopefully meet the needs of the audience of academics, policymakers and research funders, but hopefully it will extend beyond that as well. So that's why we need to make it accessible. And practically there as well, we're producing it in a downloadable format to reduce wastage of materials. And then just finally, just to say that in this final phase of work, all our meetings are being held online to reduce travel demands on participants and also to help with carbon emissions as well. So again, with that phase, we've got all 3 guiding principles. So that's a very brief overview of the project and the work we're doing. And I hope it's also helped to show how the guiding principles are being used in our project. And I'm happy to answer any questions when we get to the question and answer session.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Catherine. That was fantastic. And I look forward to hearing more about the project as you go on and produce outputs and maybe hear more about that later in the year. So that was Catherine Price from the University of Nottingham. Now we're going to hand over to Patrick Elf, a second award winner and early career researcher in the Flex Fund Round 1. So Patrick, I think you're based in Middlesex University. Over to you, please.
Thank you. Yes, as Patrick said, my name is Patrick Elf. I'm leading the Regenerative Post-Growth Fashion Project, and we were one of the lucky recipients of the first round Flex Fund. The research team consists of Safia Mini, Professor Fergus Lyon, and Dr. Andrea Burnham, based here at Middlesex. And I thought I use my 3 minutes that I have to talk you very briefly through our objectives and how they also are intertwined or interlinked with the access principles. So in our practice-oriented research, which is really based on on-the-ground realities in India and Bangladesh, we analyze buyer-supplier relationships and identify alternative practices, so-called post-growth practices that are perceived necessary to really make progress towards a more sustainable fashion and textile sector, which we know is as one of the most polluting sectors in the world. And by doing so, we aim to address a couple of things such as exploitative labor practices, overconsumption, but also pollution and emission-related issues. I actually have not only one slide, I have 2 slides, and you will see a little bit more about the outputs in a moment. But we really hope to drive knowledge co-production with buyers, also with the extensive network that our colleague Safia Mini already has developed over the last 20 years or so. And one of the things that really sits at the heart of our research approach is the dissemination and the impact strategy that taps into the access principles of knowledge co-production, but also, again, of the environmental sustainability principle. And I know I have very limited time, so allow me to skip to the next slide and tell you a little bit more about what we're hoping to get out of the project. We're actually developing at the moment 7 short films that hopefully allows us to really reach also audiences, not only within academia, but like especially beyond academia. Those are 7 short films that really try to demonstrate the value of different practices in the fashion sector and how they can make a difference. We also write industry report. Here, the idea is really to, again, engage with people and audiences outside academia. And yeah, it goes without saying that we will publish from our research. But what I would really like to stress here is the importance of generating awareness among buyers and other actors along this fashion supply chain. And last but not least, that we believe that we really just scratched the surface of our research. And I think there's loads coming out. And I think before I go, I would just really like to say thank you for the opportunity to do the research, because it's not necessarily something that we take for granted, especially the work from Sarah and the whole team, allowing early career researcher to access a bigger audience through the support that is provided by the Access team. So I shall finish there, and similar to Catherine, more than happy to answer any sort of questions later on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Patrick. Fantastic. So I think we're done with the kind of our information to you stage of today. But there is opportunity for us now to do a bit of Q&A, and you can use the chat facility to write things in. The questions can be directed at Catherine Price or Patrick Elf or myself, depending on exactly what nature of query you might have. So yeah, I don't know if anybody wants to kick off. Sarah Baker, have you got any clues here?
Yes, Patrick. We've got quite a few questions on the Padlet page.
I see.
So first question we have is, can I ask how Access defines social science? Are business and management studies classified as social science? We are in a business school and we wish to apply as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be okay. I mean, we basically come back to the kind of broad definitions provided by ESRC itself and related institutions like the Academy of Social Science. And as far as I know, they would include, say, business management organizations as social science. So that would be okay with me, I think. So yeah, I think that would be fine.
Thanks. Thanks, Patrick. We've got another question here. Quite a few questions about international collaborations. I'll come back to that one. We did touch on this. Will unsuccessful bids to the Flex Fund be ineligible for resubmission to other UKRI funding calls as per the ESRC resubmissions policy?
Not that I'm aware of, no, in terms of ineligibility, but the only thing I'd say is that because of the nature of Access Flex Fund submissions, they won't really be suited to many other kind of conventional funding calls anyway. But yeah, as far as I know, this is a program that Access is convening and running according to ESRC rules, but Access is the grant holder. So in that sense, I don't think it's going to be an issue about resubmission, because resubmission wouldn't be coming back to Access. So no, I don't think that would be a problem.
Okay, right. A couple of the questions around international collaborations. Is the scope of the project within the UK? Can we collaborate with international organisations to work on a topic? that matters for more than one country?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is addressed in the frequently answered questions. I mean, as Patrick's project makes clear, we're not ruling out projects that have an international dimension, but it's a question of emphasis. And we are looking for projects, even if they have an international dimension, to be UK relevant and to have a kind of a center of gravity in the UK as well. So it's hard to say without knowing a bit more about exactly what each proposal might involve. But I think we've tried to be as clear as possible in our guidance documents about what the international dimension might look like. And if that is still, not really helpful enough, then we'd have to have another conversation knowing a bit more about what you're doing. But I would look at what Patrick has been doing in round one as an indicator of what we are prepared to fund as much as anything else, and that hopefully will provide you with sufficient guidance at this point.
Thanks, Patrick. Hopefully that answers a couple of other questions that's just similar on the Padlet. A question here, which again, I think is in the information about the project, but maybe be useful just to underline. Are there any expected project timelines? For example, 2-year projects. Does funding need to be used within that time frame?
Yeah, I mean, what we want is that all of the projects are completed by September 2026. And that's because Access itself is going to finish at the end of January 2027. So we have pretty much a 24-month window, because it's going to take us until September, October this year to get new projects started. So they have effectively about a 24-month window beyond which they cannot continue. They don't have to be 2 years long, though. They can be less than 2 years long, but they can't be more than 2 years in duration. So that's all the guidance we're saying. I think the exact duration of your project depends on what you're trying to achieve, and we're not going to dictate that to you. So basically, in a nutshell, it's up to 2 years and finishing by the end of September 2026 at the very latest. And it's worth thinking that through carefully, because often projects get delayed in starting. It can take a little bit longer to recruit somebody. It can take a little bit longer to get collaboration agreements signed between different partners. So it's worth adding a bit of contingency in your project planning now, so that you're not running into challenges around that deadline of September 26th later on. So do think that through quite carefully, I would have thought, with your other application colleagues and with your colleagues at the university who you might be talking through ideas and securing permissions from. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. This is a quick question. Is there a maximum number of co-Is that can form part of the core project team?
I can see Sue Williams is putting helpful material in the chat, so just be aware of that too. There might be more. But we have not specified a maximum number of co-Is. No, we haven't. I would have thought beyond 100, and it starts to get a little bit silly, but no, we're not specifying any particular number. But bear in mind, we will try and judge whether your application team is fit for purpose. And that's linked to where the resources are being shared and spent as well. So do bear that in mind, that we kind of need to see value in the contributors to the project. So there isn't really room for additional people who don't seem to be obviously responsible for delivering anything. So think through, who do you need to deliver a successful project, and then think through what the co-Is might look like on top of that. So what that means, I suppose, is that if you have a program of work, try and make it clear which co-I is involved in which bit of the work program, so that there's a very clear kind of readability between the people involved, the organizations involved, the work program, and the outputs and outcomes that you might be expecting to arise from that.
Thanks, Patrick. A few more questions still coming in. Are PIs from engineering schools allowed to submit to this call, who work on the interface of engineering and management?
That sounds marginal to me. Probably not. It depends. I mean, as I said, these grants are to advance social science. So it has to be really clear how the applicant PI and the application itself is doing just that. So that to me sounds a little bit questionable. I wouldn't be too sure of that. I guess it depends. I mean, if someone in their own personal career straddles different disciplines, then it might be fine. But we're not interested in funding engineering submissions here. We're not interested in funding engineering teams in a sense. So it kind of depends on exactly what that project is trying to do. But we're not ruling out interdisciplinarity. That's really clear in the Access program. But it has to be about social science in the context of interdisciplinarity rather than interdisciplinarity per se. At the end of the day, the Access program is about advancing environmental social science. So if that's what you're doing, then great. But if you're advancing engineering in an interdisciplinary context, that doesn't sound like what we're primarily interested in. And it might be a different funding opportunity is best suited for that.
Thanks, Patrick.
I'm going to invite Birgitta to answer a couple of questions and duck here for a second. But anyway, are there any other ones, Sarah? Maybe Birgitta can take over and share some of these questions too. I know we've got Kate Burningham too, if anybody's got questions about our guiding principles as well. Karen.
I might have to put Birgitta, I think she might be on mute at the moment, so I'll just have to find her to take her off mute. So you might want to answer this question while I do that. This one is around academic partners, non-academic partners, sorry. Can you say a bit more about any requirements in terms of link up with non-academic partners for this round? Is it correct that they cannot lead on any bid? If so, what percentage of the overall bid can they form?
Good question. Birgitta, over to you, and I'll help you out but I'm sure you can answer that one. Go for it.
Myself. So hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the eligibility criteria, I think, are quite clear in the FAQs as well. So the lead applicant has to come from an organization, a research organization that ESRC acknowledges or recognizes. So, and there are, of course, some research organizations that can apply for funding, ESRC funding, but that's the key thing. So if the lead applicant is not eligible to apply for ESRC funding, then you have to go and find another partner who can be the lead organization. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Mm.
Thanks,
I think there was an additional part of the question about proportions. So if I could just pick up on that detail. So as far as I'm aware, ESRC rules are that up to 30% of the total project budget can go to non-research organizational partners. Mm-hmm. And that's in our FAQs. Okay, and we actually want that distribution. We want to see that because it shows us that non-academic partners are actively materially involved in the project. So it's up to 30% of the total budget. And bear in mind that these are 100% FEC grants. So that's 30% of the total cost rather than what's typically the case, which is an 80% grant from a funding organization like UKRI.
Okay, next question.
Sorry,
Birgitta.
I just wanted to add also to the previous question, because I think a lot of questions clearly are about eligibility, whether from a different discipline or from wherever you come from. I think Patrick said it really well. The key thing is that we're looking for research that advances the capacity, advances environmental social science, the capacity, impact, the perceived value of environmental social science, and that's the key thing to recognize when you put your application together. So if you're from a business school or you are an engineer who does a lot of social science in an engineering faculty, or it's not necessarily you fit in or you fit out. The key thing is we're looking at the content.
Thanks, Birgitta. A question, either Patrick or Birgitta. Can partners use their own funds to add into the project, or must partners be funded through the same fund?
That's a good question. I don't think we have any issue with people leveraging other funds to bring to bear on these initiatives as well. But I guess it would be useful in the application if they made it clear whether there were any conditions or risks associated with that additional funding that might be brought to bear. Is it conditional on various circumstances or whatever? So just try and make it as clear as possible how much additional resources being brought to bear and under what kind of conditions it might be before it comes through. But yeah, in principle, sounds good. If it can make the project more impactful, if it seems to fit, then it sounds like a really good idea.
Right, I think we've got about another 3 questions on here. One is around our great round 1 awardees and their projects. Somebody's asking they'd love to hear more about round 1 speakers, about what knowledge co-production looks like in their projects. Can you get into more detail? I'm not sure, yeah, time-wise. Shall we leave that one perhaps to the end? And then perhaps Patrick and Catherine can have a quick think whether they've got some, perhaps, yeah, top 3, top 4 areas there. I think also just to mention that they, on the website, each project does have, or many of them have, a guiding principles section where they talk a bit more detail about how they've applied the guiding principles to the project. So that might be quite helpful too.
Yeah. I mean, I also think, Sarah, that I'm sure Catherine and Patrick wouldn't mind if people contacted them directly if they were looking to find out more about how they were going about doing their projects. And I'm sure they'd be open to talking about their projects and sharing findings as they're ongoing. So feel free to make those kind of direct connections with Catherine and Patrick. And Catherine, Patrick, if you're interested, maybe pop your email addresses in the chat without kind of nudging you too much, but I'm sure you can take that up. But I think it's a really good question. I think, the guiding principles sound great in the abstract, but what do people actually do with them? I think that's something we're really interested in ourselves in Access. And these PIs who are here and the rest of the round 1 PIs, we're hoping will be useful sources of knowledge around that. So yeah, if we have time, great. But otherwise, I'm sure you can contact them directly and find out more.
Okay, last 2 questions. Could you elaborate on the peer review process?
What, all of us? I mean, I think the first thing to say is that we are doing blind peer review in Access because of our commitment to EDI and the other guiding principles. So I mean, this is all set out in the FAQs, but basically all submitted proposals will go through 3 procedures. Number 1, are they eligible? If they're eligible, then they'll go out to peer review. And that peer review, as I said, is blind. So the people who are reviewing the content of the application will not know who the PI is by name or institution. They'll just be looking at the content of the application form, the types of project output, etc., that it's being sought. So that then leads to peer review scores. And at that stage, all of the submitted projects that have been peer reviewed go to a review panel. And this is the final stage. And we will look at projects that rate very highly on peer review, and we will try and reach a consensus around which of the 3 projects that we wish to fund that are above a certain quality threshold and which meet our other goals of having a balanced and diverse portfolio of projects that we fund. And we are following that kind of consistent process, which is similar to the kinds of review procedures that UKRI and ESRC and other funding councils follow as well. So in a nutshell, that's what that is, but it's also specified in the guidance documents.
Great. Are those projects who receive funding for round one, are they more likely to get funding for round 2, e.g., for example, to develop their work further?
No, they're not. No, there's no fast track to round two. Sorry, Patrick and Catherine. Even if you take part in the webinar, it doesn't mean you get a quick route into round two. But so no, everybody's on an equal footing in round two. There's no a priori, people are already halfway down the road. So no, they're not. But I mean, obviously, round one, successful award winners will know more about access and the guiding principles. They'll have had that positive experience of being through, but no, they will not have any particular advantage. We're still going to have a blind peer review process, and we won't know whether it's coming from Middlesex or Manhattan or whatever. We will be looking at the quality of the content of the submissions, and that's what counts. So I hope that's clear.
Thanks, Patrick. We've had two more questions come in. Yeah, I don't think we've answered these yet. So for the outcome, increased use of social science amongst Pacific target groups, how would success be gauged here?
Well, I guess it depends on the target group and what the social science context is. It's very difficult to say any more than that without knowing a bit more about the content of the application. But we would be looking for proposals to have that kind of detail embedded into it. So some element of evaluation or some element of measuring what outcomes are. That might be gathering of testimonials. It depends, but I think that's not for us to dictate a priori, I think. But if you're claiming that a certain target group are going to end up using social science more, then there would need to be clear indicators of what that might look like, whether it's citation or testimonials or some other evidence of impact. But we would need to see that.
Thanks, Patrick. And finally, to Patrick or Birgitta, most projects funded in round one are mostly qualitative. No data. Oh, sorry, another one's come in. It's moved everything around on my screen. Yes. Most projects funded in round one are mostly qualitative. Do data science quantitative methods fall within the eligibility criteria for this round?
Birgitta, do you want to answer that?
I would say yes. I think the reason, I don't know why what the underlying reason was why they're mostly qualitative, but perhaps it's partly because there's short-term projects, but there's absolutely no reason why we would exclude any other kind of approaches. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, completely agree. Absolutely. There's no a priori decision here about some methods being better than others. But bear in mind, all of those projects were funded at less than 30K. So they were approximately 10% of the value of these projects. So we're looking for bigger projects. So yeah, you think about what method you're going to need, or a mix of methods, I would say. And that's more useful rather than, so we've got no inherent bias towards qualitative methods at all. It depends what you need to do for your project. So argue it as you need.
Okay. We have got one more that's come in.
I think there's one on the chat I spotted as well about from Leanne Tonkin about cultural heritage. Don't know if you spotted that, Sarah.
No.
But in a nutshell, Leanne, I would just say that the museum stakeholders are non-academic partner organizations potentially, so that shouldn't be a problem in terms of considering them to be your target audience or considering them to be potential partner organizations. Will cultural heritage be included within the core elements? It's impossible to say without knowing a bit more. But as I said, access is about advancing environmental social science. So if you think cultural heritage fits into advancing environmental social science, and that social science idea is consistent with how, say, ESRC defines the social sciences, then go for it. But it's pretty hard to say just on that basis.
Thanks, Patrick. This is kind of Pacific question as well. Hello, I'm developing a proposal with an atmospheric scientist. Sorry, it's just jumped around again. Sorry, people are posting and it's moving everything around. Here we go. to develop an interdisciplinary network and research matrix that integrates social science and natural sciences knowledge about the potential development and deployment of solar radiation modification technologies. We envisage this as a pilot project for a greater collaboration and would like to include key academic and non-academic partners in a scenario workshop. There is one non-academic organisation in particular we would like to work with in exploring this project, but I'm not sure for the purposes of the application what level of participation would constitute a partnership. Would they need to be a co-I?
Yeah, well, I think the question is nothing to do with solar radiation management. It's to do with partnership and co-production, I would say. So this is an opportunity to bring Kate Burningham in, or perhaps Birgitta, around guiding principles. But I think it's a question about what does co-production look like? Is it genuine, or yeah, but anyway, I'll hand over.
I would, sorry, you can't see Kate. Ah, there's Kate.
There's not a kind of one size fits all. So I think it depends who your partners are and how you want to work with them and how they want to work. But I think when we're looking at the justification of resources, we will be looking to see whether people are kind of putting their money where their mouth is, if you like. We don't want to see kind of empty statements about partnerships without seeing that there are resources there to cover all of the guiding principles, really, because all of these things need resourcing. So it's up to you to think about how to do that. It might not always be appropriate for some of your partners to be co-investigators for whatever reason, but I think through those things and justify carefully how people are being involved and make sure that you are, really sort of supporting the contribution of 8 partners who are involved.
Yeah. And I would only just add to that what we're trying to get away from is something that's been fairly common in research submissions for many years, is where you get a letter of support from an organization and that helps you to get the funding, but after that you don't really see them very much, maybe until the very, very end, and then there's some tokenistic handing over of the findings at the very end of the project. So that's not the way we would like these projects to run, and we think that one of the ways you can best evidence co-production with partners is by putting people in your application teams and thinking about where your resources go, as Kate said, rather than it being just a kind of a tokenistic mention of partners. So whether they should be in the application team or not, I think will depend on what you're trying to achieve and what your outcomes are. But remember, these projects are about advancing environmental social science. They're not about advancing solar radiation management per se. So you've got to think through, is this the right grant call for a project about solar radiation management, unless environmental social science is at the center of what you're trying to achieve in relation to that topic area. Okay.
Thanks, Patrick. I think that was quite useful discussion. One last one. I've had a quick scroll down just to make sure I haven't missed anyone. Do project team members need to have a PhD if from an academic institution? For example, could they be a co-I if they don't have a PhD but do, for example, have a master's?
Birgitta, do you want to take that one?
I would say yes, you don't necessarily need a PhD. We actually have had some interesting discussions with people outside of academia as well, where people working as social scientists might not necessarily have a PhD. So I don't think that is an issue. I would say that one of the things, of course, we are really keen to encourage early career researchers to be involved, to think about the support that people receive. So the capacity building. We have a mentoring scheme in Access, for instance, so maybe you want to link to what was already available within Access, but yeah, consider and how you would support early career researchers in your application.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I think that is all we have at the moment. what we'll do on the Padlet, if there are any late questions that come in, or if there are any that we haven't been able to answer, I'll make sure that we go in there and answer them. And obviously for people who haven't been able to stay for the whole of the webinar, there will be a recording of this, which will be on the website in a few days' time. People can catch up with the Q&A. Any closing thoughts, Patrick?
Well, I guess only to ask you, Sarah, I mean, we are planning to keep the Padlet open and running, aren't we? So it's not like the Padlet is finished as a tool, a mechanism of either asking questions of us or posting, information about proposal ideas or people that you'd like to work with. So there are ways of staying in touch with us. But for me, it comes back to the call documents, the frequently answered questions. Save yourselves and us time by taking a close look through those first. And if you can't find the answer to your question, then do come back to us and continue to use the Padlet as a useful resource to reach out to various people, including potentially ourselves. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Birgitta, did you want to say anything?
No, other than I'm really looking forward to receiving some fascinating and fabulous applications. Yeah, good luck, everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll make sure that the Padlet, the link to the Padlet is available with the recording as well. It's also on the website. I'll also mention that we have an expert database, and we do have some of our partners are on there. So if you are looking to make connections, collaborations, do take some time. Again, it's on the website. Should be easy to find. Hope you've found it useful, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers.